when we talk about the environment and we talk about climate change and all of these big, huge problems facing the world, it's a lot of doom and gloom, to be honest.
Yeah.
The UN recently released a new report saying that climate change crises are going to start a lot sooner than previously predicted. By 2040, they say we're going to be pretty much in global turmoil as a result of climate change, which 2040 is not that far away.
22 years. It's nothing.
Yeah.
It goes on blink of an eye.
We'll all be alive and relatively well.
And don't they say that we have to grow twice as much food by 2050?
Yeah, we'll have to grow twice as much food. The population continues growing. And so, there can be a lot of doom and gloom. But the good news behind all of this is that the solutions are relatively simple. They're easy things that all of us can do. You mentioned before how it takes 20 pounds of kind of plant matter, beans and grains and corn, for example, to grow just 1 pound of meat from an animal. Well, that means that just by eating plant-based foods, we can shepherd in a much more resource-efficient food supply. We can feed more people with less. And that's exactly what we need to do if we want to save the planet for future generations. We need to be able to do more with less. And that's what plant-based eating offers us.
So, okay, we know that, or you and I and Alexandra know that plants have bountiful sources of protein. That's where the animals get their protein. And then we recycle that through the animals and think that we need to eat the animal to get the protein. Can you bust that myth?
Yeah, it's crazy to think that we need to funnel protein-rich, nutrient-dense food through an animal in order to get protein it's just a myth. In fact, we eat way too much protein, especially in the developed world, and it's no good for us. It leads to chronic diseases. It leads to the worst healthcare problems and healthcare crises that we have in our country, in part, especially because the protein, when it comes from animals, is also full of fat and saturated fat and cholesterol and all these other really nasty, really negative things, not to mention environmentally unsustainable. So there's a whole world of plant-based proteins out there that are packed with protein. That, green peas, for example, pea protein, peanuts, peanut butter, tofu, seitan, tempeh. You could go on and on and on. Even green leafy vegetables have protein in them. Protein is found in so many of the foods that we eat. And just by eating more of those products that come from plant sources rather than the animal sources, we can do something that's good for our health. We can do something that's good for the planet and something that's delicious in the process. Before I became vegan and before I started advocating for a plant-based diet, I just kind of ate like the typical American diet, meat and potatoes. We'd have hamburgers, we'd have steak, chicken. I pretty much stuck to that type of food. I never even thought to try foods like tofu or tempeh or to, use products like chickpeas in different kinds of applications. And once I made the switch to a vegetarian and then a vegan diet, I realized that there's a lot of creativity that can be done in the kitchen to eat better and more sustainably, yes, but also just to eat a bigger variety of delicious foods, which is kind of a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, one thing that I don't think meat eaters ever think about is that over 50% of the protein intake that they eat comes from plants. But they're not factoring that in, right? They're just counting every time they eat a chicken breast or maybe every time they eat an egg or something. But talk about over proteining if they're trying to do the, maybe 1 gram per pound of body weight or 2, for goodness sake, some bodybuilders. They're getting an incredible amount of protein from the plant sources because plants are alive and they're made of amino acids. And so they have protein. I say all the time, lemons have 16% protein. No one even recognizes that a fruit or a vegetable would have that element as part of it, but it does. So you need to be adding in all the plants into your, protein list, Michael. I don't know if you count your protein.
Wow. And by the way, your book has incredible variety. So your book is proof that you can eat an incredible, varied diet as a vegan. I want to just delve a little deeper into what Dotsie asked, which is the waste that goes into getting meat from animals. You have a talk where you will start dissecting how much resources go into an egg sandwich. And you start by pouring a gallon of water just away. And actually, that's just the beginning. Can you delve more deeply into this conversation?
Yeah. So, I was really fortunate earlier this year to be invited to do a TED Talk at UCLA, which I think is a video you're referring to. And
I think you were at Google too. I saw you at Google.
Yeah, Google invited me to do a Google food talk in their kind of kitchen lab, I guess they call it, which was a really fun experience. But I was trying to come up with a way to visually illustrate to an audience of people. At UCLA, there were about 2,000 people in the audience and all the people who view it online. And I wanted to come up with a visual way to illustrate exactly what it looks like to waste all the resources that go into making meat, eggs, and dairy. And so I kind of centered the talk around the idea of an egg sandwich where you've got cheese and a little bit of sausage and an egg patty, for example, something you might get at McDonald's or any other kind of fast food chain for breakfast. And I dumped out a gallon of water on the stage and said, essentially, if you want to make just the egg in this breakfast sandwich, you'd have to dump out not one, but 53 gallons of water. That's how many gallons of water go into producing a single egg. And the reason for that is when we eat a product from an animal, an egg or a glass of milk or a burger or a chicken nugget, we're not just eating the meat from that animal, we're essentially eating all of the resources that have been put into that animal to make that product, which also means all the resources that have been put into growing the crops to feed that animal. So when you think about water usage, for example, 53 gallons to make one egg, well, you've got to cut down large swaths of land in order to grow feed for chickens. You've got to water all those plants. You've got to harvest them. You've got to transport them. You've got to process them. Then you've got to feed them to the chickens, who also drink water, obviously, to stay alive. And so when you eat their egg at the end, you've eaten all of those resources. A glass of soy milk takes only about 20 gallons of water to produce. But a glass of cow's milk takes hundreds of gallons of water to produce. And the reason for that is when you eat plant-based foods, you're just cutting out the middleman. You're just taking the plant-based product and turning it directly into food rather than funneling it through an animal first. It's a no-brainer.
It's a no-brainer, but pretty much nobody knows about this. But thanks to you, you're getting the word out. Michael, had you heard this before?
I have, actually, yes.
Oh, okay.
I'm a little bit more, in tune with it. I mean, I grew up on a farm, where I had to deal with animals, feeding them and doing all the things that we're talking about here.
Okay.
So, unfortunately, I was on that end.
So when you eat a burger, do you think of, what is it? Is it 5,000 gallons for a quarter pounder? How many gallons of water is it for a quarter pounder?
Yeah, it's thousands. I think for a steak, for just a regular cut of steak, it's about 2,500 gallons. 2,500.
So, okay, Michael, that's the picture we want in your head next time you eat a steak.
Oh, perfect. Just keep putting these pictures in my head. I appreciate it. Thanks.
And it wasn't always this way. I mean, farms have evolved over even just the last few decades to become these industrialized mega farms where even, my parents' generation, for example, you still had to use the animal as a middleman between crops and meat or milk or eggs. But a lot fewer resources went into them in order to produce that, and it wasn't produced as industrially. And so a lot of people today, I don't think, realize exactly how much our food supply has changed and how industrialized it's become and how mega these farms have become over the last few years. And so, couple that with our population growth, where we need to be producing, exponentially more meat and dairy and eggs to feed the global population, and it's just been a recipe for disaster.
I think on top of all of it, too, is the fact that I hate the waste. I hate that we produce so much of this food and we just simply throw it away more than we consume it.
Hey, folks. Okay. Back by very popular demand is our plant-powered plate fridge magnet, which you are going to receive for free if you leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. So here are the details. Just write your quick review. Does not need to be long, does not need to be a whole story. Just be honest and speak from the heart. Then take a quick screenshot of the review you wrote and email it to us at podcast@switchforgood.org. That's podcast@switchforgood.org. And include your mailing address so we can send you a power plate. We are doing this because the more reviews we garner, the higher we go in search results. which means more folks will learn about our podcast. So the power is in your hands. Leave us a review, and zoom, zoom, your power plate arrives at your doorstep.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switchforgood.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to switch for good. This is the future.